This is about the sustainable economy. An economy is when the state of a country or region is looked at in terms of its production and consumption of goods and services and the supply of money. But a sustainable economy is an economy that meets the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations. Externalities is when a polluter doesn't have to account for the pollution that they do, so we can make them pay by charging for externalities. Sociopaths, like the Joker here, have no empathy. So how do we deal with them as part of this overall? So environmentally sustainable futures, they're beginning to happen, but there are issues. And the issues are fear of change, fear of transition, greed, profits moving offshore, politicians, etc. Algae are one viable example. They're a very new example. And we can make oil from the small algae cells. And that's important because we love the internal combustion engine, and we're going to need it for the foreseeable future. Electricity is a great option when the batteries improve. We're almost there, but we're not there yet, and it's going to take time to make that transition. So we still need the internal combustion engine. But if everybody starts to use fossil fuels, like India and China and places like that, we end up with a real problem. And this is the kind of things that happen because they haven't lived with that pollution for a long period of time. I mean, if you go to Cuba, you'll see how much the pollution from the cars was back in the 50s. Fossil fuels are currently about 80% of our energy use worldwide, but algae are everywhere. So getting back to the algae, you can see the ship has picked up algae as it was going across the Atlantic. And algae, they use the sun, they create oil and sugars, but unlike other plants, they do not have the woody cellulose that's needed to be broken down, the bark and the solid part of the wood. There are so many types of algae, it's mind-blowing. Algae can be green, red, brown, black, gold. There are over 30,000 species. Some of them are a pest, as in swimming pools. Some of them are even worse pest when they affect our drinking water. And last year, 2014, toxic algae made water undrinkable for about 400,000 people. It was a major problem. But there again, there's edible algae. Sushi, there's algae used in ice cream, in health foods, and it's a good source of carbohydrates and proteins. It's been farmed for thousands of years. But there are things happening now because of the research into the many different species of algae that we can begin to look at algae as a source of oil. And this, I mean, one of the things that people ask me, well, why would it replace fossil fuel? It replaces fossil fuel because it's carbon neutral. And it has all sorts of byproducts. So you can get these carbohydrates and these proteins and other things. So you expose the algae to sun, the algae grows. It stores oil. It needs to be separated. It's separated out, and it just can drop right into the oil refinery. What's left can be used for animal feed and for all sorts of things like that. It's fairly easy to cultivate. This is a picture here of an open water pond, but you can use plastic bags, which they've termed photobioreactors. Photobioreactors can take all sorts of different forms. This guy down in Florida, the owner of Algenol, has worked out a two-step process where he figures he can make algae oil for about $3 a gallon. Hydrothermal liquefaction is another approach. It converts the algae without having to remove quite so much water, so that's really good. And so algae looks fairly promising. there are issues, and the main issues are the political issues. How do we get oil companies and other companies that are so invested in fossil fuels to change? We have to change. I mean, we don't really have an option. If we want to do something about climate change, then we have to do something like using algae, because algae is carbon neutral. It uses the sun, it uses water, but it can use any water. It can use ocean water, it can use wastewater. The problem is the new carbon. Here, this example was an energy plant that used fossil fuels. Conservation can help, and we really should be going in that direction, but it's not the ultimate solution. We've got to wean ourselves off the fossil fuels. Electric cars are excellent, but the battery technology isn't there yet. I can't get from my home to where I'm doing this work in an electric car. And I can't go by bus. There are places in Canada that are very difficult to get into. Canada hasn't done much in the algae field. It's because our focus has been on fossil fuels and our government is focused on fossil fuels. The United States, on the other hand, has been very concerned and has provided all sorts of monetary incentives to get the algae industry going, and they've got it going. And many other countries are doing this as well, including Saudi Arabia. I mean, when Saudi Arabia starts to get into the algae business, you know that fossil fuels are on the way out. Algae industry has made huge progress, mainly because of the work that's been done in the United States. They've made the Department of National Defense use it, and this particular plane was flying on algae oil. They have ships going on algae oil. But we need to make a huge effort. There needs to be an educational effort. There needs to be people trained to be able to produce it. And we need people like the guys at Algenol to really move this ahead. I mean, they're looking at 140,000 acres in Florida. It's doable. We've just got to keep trying.